Good evening, Erev Tov. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome you to this fantastic session as part of the Liberal Judaism Education Hub, organized jointly with Artsenu. And tonight we have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you on the very exciting and interesting topic of African asylum seekers in Israel. And it's my pleasure to welcome Celia Gould here, who has put together this great panel for us. And so I'm going to hand over straight to Celia so that we can go straight to the topic on hand. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah. Look, thank you so much for asking me to join and help out with this today. It's that the whole topic of African asylum seekers in Israel is one which has been hugely important to me over the last, I'm ashamed to say, 10 years, actually. It's a topic which I'm not sure many people are even particularly aware of, but one which became hugely important to me in my time in Israel. So just to recap, I was in Israel for 5 years, and I left 5 years ago. My husband, Matthew Gould, was the British ambassador at the time, and I fell into this community by mistake. We had blankets that we needed to get rid of at the house, at the residence, and one way or another, I ended up down in South Tel Aviv meeting with one of our presenters this evening, Didi Maimin, and what she showed me that day was something I'd never seen before. And anyway, so I ended up really, really very involved with a lot of the organisations who are presenting this evening, learning a huge amount about amazing work that they do with this community of African, mainly Eritrean and Ethiopians who'd ended up in Israel. At the time when I was there 5 years ago, we were talking about people being picked up at the border with Egypt, with the Sinai, who'd largely been trafficked out of refugee camps in Libya and places such as that, and effectively picked up and just dropped off in Tel Aviv. And so the issues that I was looking at the time were ones to do with, what does a community do that's just appeared in another country with which they're unfamiliar? What do you do if you are without your family and you have a child? What do you do if you can't work, but you have to work because you don't have any benefits? All these sorts of issues. As I say, my husband and I left 5 years ago, so I'm actually 5 years out of date to an extent. So I'm as excited as anyone this evening to hear from all of our presenters about what's happened over the last few years, where we are now, where this community has got to, what are the challenges that face them, what is the work that these amazing organisations are doing to help this community, and I suppose what can any of us do from here. So look, just to give you a brief run through of who's going to be speaking. We have Miri from Mesila. She can explain what that is, but it's a sort of quasi-governmental organisation working across the community. Then we have Didi from Kuchinate, and who does amazing work with the women of the community. Ricky from Elifelet, who works with childcare centres and helping with children in the community. Julie Fisher, who was a great friend of mine, remains a great friend of mine, former wife of the former US ambassador, I should say, who does incredible work across the community. And then finally, we finish on a real high, actually, with Mutasim Ali, who's actually from the community itself. So I see that Miri has joined us. I'm not sure if she's on mute or not, but Miri, if you're ready to speak, we'd love to hear from you, please.
Hi, Celia. Great seeing you.
Hello.
I miss you.
Me too.
Okay, I received a few minutes. I'll try to be as quick as I can.
It's okay.
I will give like a little bit of background regarding the asylum seekers, and then like a minute of what Mesila is doing in the in a routine, and what is happening the last 4 months since the corona crisis came into our world. I will give a little brief regarding the asylum seekers. Like Celia said, the majority are from Eritrea. There are some from Ethiopia that their identity is like not specific, and from Sudan. We're talking in Tel Aviv, we are speaking around 40,000 asylum seekers and other migrants and people without a status. From them, around 6,500 are children. when the majority of the children are small, from the age of birth until 6. The majority of the community lives in 3 neighborhoods in the south and east of Tel Aviv. I think the biggest critique, as we all know, is that the status of the asylum seekers is not being checked actually by the government of Israel. The majority are still in a status of what we call an asylum seeker and not a refugee, because the majority of the requests to check their asylum seeker status are not checked, are like thousands of requests for years already on the desk of the government, and nobody checks. The few that were checked many times were refused. And I think the percentage, I don't know, I put the Darfur area because there a few hundreds of Darfuris did receive some kind of status, but from the Eritreans and the Sudanese, it's like 0.001. I think like there's an argument if they are 12 or 15 or 20, but like almost nobody received the status of refugee in Israel. The situation of the community, and I will talk in a routine time, the community lives actually a large percentage of them, or the majority, in a very in poverty, in small apartments, divided apartments. Many families lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, maybe apartment that is divided, like each family lives in 1 bedroom or in 1.5 sometimes. The majority, I will focus on the children. I believe that the majority of the children of the asylum seekers are, by any Western standard, considered children in some spectrum of risk, of danger. It can be because they are in babysitter in the pirate kindergartens that are very dangerous, 12 hours a day. It can be that they don't have a hot meal every day on their table. It can be that the parents that are good and loving parents but are in surviving and working all day, so the children remained in the streets or at home alone. And of course it can be violence or sexual abuse, or parents that cannot take care for any reason of the children. Like we said, a lot of the children, I'm speaking mainly from the age of birth until 3, are in those babysitters, what we call, that are the pirate frames that the community establish for them, because there are not other options. And unfortunately, many of them are very neglected, very dangerous. Many children were very few caregivers. And unfortunately, we saw over the last few years quite a lot of death of babies on those frames. There's a lot of issues. The insurance of the medical insurance of the children is voluntarily, and it costs quite a lot of, I don't know if I can convert it to dollars, so around, I don't know, $35 per child per month. So we estimate that around 50% of the children only have the health insurance and 50% don't have it. The main issue is when we're talking about children with special needs that don't have that insurance. And if I will finish with the children, looking a little bit ahead, and just a few more years, 3-4 years ahead, we will see a lot of teenagers, young teenagers that are raising in a very bad environment that is South Tel Aviv, regardless of the community. That the majority of the prostitution and drug addicts and everything is in South Tel Aviv, with parents that are surviving and working all day, with children that don't have afternoon frames, or almost don't have. So we will see in a very short few years thousands of young teenagers that we know what will happen, that will see a lot of issues regarding whatever, unwanted pregnancy and drugs and wandering the streets, children that are leaving school the minute they will get a little bit grown up. Another thing that we see with the children, that's something that it's quite disturbing, is that at the moment we have around 70 classes of kindergarten of the municipality, and 4 schools that are actually all for the children of the community. I don't know how to say it politically correct, like painted for the children of the community. It's Israel's kindergartens and school, but all the children learning them are for the community. And we hear more and more big issues from the managers, the directors of those schools, that many children get into the 3rd grade and the 4th grade and they don't know how to read and write. The majority of the children from 1st grade above, over 90% of them, 95% don't have an after school programs. At noon, the minute the school is over, they go or to some frames of the community or into the streets or back home by themselves. Like I said, with the adults, they live in poverty. The community, and I think it's one of the biggest issues, are not entitled of any kind of allowance of the government. It means if you're a single parent, if you have a child with disabilities, if you're with disability, you're not entitled of any allowance like the Israeli citizens are entitled. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of violence in the families, also towards women and also towards children. In Mesila, I think 40 or 45% of the mothers that we take care of are single mothers. They did like a mapping, like I think 3 years ago, of the women of the asylum seekers, and they found out the Ministry of Welfare actually did it. I don't know why, because eventually they didn't give any solution to that or treatment, but 5% of the women of the asylum seekers are in prostitution. If I compare it to the general population, 0.5 of the women are in prostitution, and with the asylum seekers it was 5%, that it's 10 times more. It's horrible. Of course, it has to do with traumas from the past and from the childhood, of course, but we also see, like, I don't know how to say it better than that, but economical prostitution. Like, there's nothing left for them to do than to go to that to be able to provide for their children. We see quite a lot of adults that are or drug addicts or with the alcohol issues or gambling, and unfortunately they are not entitled at all to get to be taken care of or to go into places that can take care of them. We see a lot of people in the streets that usually the adults that are with mental disabilities or sick or with physical disabilities. The adults of the asylum seekers that work and the employer pays health insurance for them, and they pay as well, so they will have insurance. But what happened with the adults is that, first of all, many of them work like in chip-chap works, like in black, I don't know how to say it, like not legally employed. So the majority of them don't have a health insurance. And what happened is that the ones who receive insurance is like insurance for the healthy, because only the ones that can work and are able to for the employers to pay, but the ones who are sick or with disabilities, they stay without any health insurance, without any option to provide for themselves.
Miri,
yeah.
Miri, can I interrupt? Just on this topic of women, I think it's a good moment to move on to Didi, because it's I think it's very interesting actually to focus on the issues facing the women, particularly around work. So if I could shift on to Didi now, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, unmute. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Miri, for that great background and description of Mesila's amazing work, a really absolutely fantastic organization that the community really would not be able to survive without. Thank you so much to the Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue for raising this issue and raising awareness about this. It's not something that is obvious, so it's really amazing that you're doing that. Thank you to Celia for inviting me. It's so lovely to see you. Celia was absolutely amazing when she was in Israel, and I think spearheaded the diplomat community to do some good work. And Julie Fisher, who's on the line, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Julie, who followed, and without her help, we would not be anywhere where we were right now. And so hi to everyone, hi to Mutassim, great ex-colleague who's now in Washington. So let me tell you about Kuchinate. Kuchinate means to crochet in Tigrinya and is the name of the non-profit organization that I am a co-director of, together with the Eritrean nun, Sister Aziza Kidane. Now, are you seeing my presentation on the screen? Yeah? No?
No.
Okay, because I think
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so are you, it needs to go one behind, and are you guys the ones that are moving it? I'm not sharing my screen. Right? Okay, I can't hear you, so I'll just move it along slowly and I will just talk about this. So I'm actually lived in London for many years. I was I'm a clinical psychologist, worked in the NHS at the Traumatic Stress Clinic. And when I came to Israel, it was about the time when all of the asylum seekers started coming through the Sinai on their way to Israel from East Africa. Many, very unfortunately, who were tortured, abused, raped, and huge amounts of money extorted from them. So when I came to Israel, I joined an organization called the African Refugee Development Center, and they were looking to do a pilot project, which was a mental health project, which was funded by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, who were going to give psychosocial support to these women who had been through the Sinai. And that's where it began. And I very soon realized that it was going to be very difficult or actually impossible to use a Western model that I was used to in working with the people that I was meeting, who were in a state of survival, who some of them had literally come barefoot with a plastic bag in their hands, who had no money, food, housing, and honestly didn't know what I wanted from them. I was with an interpreter, and they really had no special desire at that time to talk about something bad that had happened in their recent past, and were much more interested in me being able to give them money, food, a job, or something that was going to be of some kind of practical value and use. And I've also got a background of art. I had a community art studio in London when I worked there, and I guess my interests came together, and together with the most wonderful woman called Sister Aziza Kidane, who was an Eritrean nun, we started to think about what we could do that would encompass a number of different aspects. One of them is rehabilitation and psychosocial support, but at the same time is income generation, and at the same time bring women together to support each other, and also to help as many women as we can at the same time, because there was not much funding, as you can imagine, at the time for this kind of assistance in Israel. And so that's where it all began, with a few experiments. We came up with the idea of crocheting baskets made of recycled materials from a factory that used to throw away the yarn. Are you guys seeing my pictures? Because I can't see any pictures on the screen. It would be really nice if we could just slowly sort of go through them as I'm talking, so that I could share my screen, but if you just move it, because I believe you want to do it, right? So we're just stuck on the one picture. If we could just keep going, that would be great. So there's an example of a basket on the screen that has come to what we do now. We started to crochet baskets, and we moved on. Is someone writing to me? So we can't move it on.
Didi, I think you need to move them.
Well, I can move if I share the screen, but you guys share the screen. So I'm happy to share my own screen. No? Okay, never mind. I'll just talk. Don't worry, because we don't have much time. Let me see.
I think we are seeing your screen.
I'm used to Zoom. Okay, you are? Okay. Okay. Let me just I'll just speak to you about it, because there's not much time. Sorry. We started off with crocheting beautiful handmade baskets, where we got a designer who helped. And from then we moved on to many other forms of handicrafts that we now do, which are baskets, carpets, puffs. We do West African fabric, crafts, books, purses, dolls, you name it. We started off with about 5 women in slowly in 2011 into 2012 until we had our own studio in 2013. And we now have well over 200 women in our community who are all taking part in some kind of work. It's like an art resilience community where the women work, they earn money for everything that they do. And most people are aware of the psychological benefits of making something. I think everyone can say when they've done some kind of handicraft, they feel good about it. There's lots of scientific evidence to back this up, that doing things like handicrafts, like sewing, crocheting, etc., are extremely good for decreasing depression, anxiety, and reducing stress. And our women are certainly testament to that. We sell our stuff all over the place in our studio in South Tel Aviv, as well as in homes and in we have a store right now in Tel Aviv that we've been donated in, and we sell overseas. We ship our stuff. We sell in shops now and all over the place, such as online stores, and you can have a look at Kuchinate.com and see it. In addition to the income generating aspect of making things, we also, before COVID, had coffee ceremonies, made traditional lunches, and taught crochet, and basically advocated to groups coming from all over the world and in Israel, from Taglit to Mechina to the International Council of the Israel Museum to the Chicago Federation Group. And our women had an opportunity to really share their lives and their stories with the people coming in, which is also extremely therapeutic. In 2016 we started to do art collaborations with an artist called Gil Yefman, and we started to make, to transform not only the work that was going on into something that was purely income generating and maybe therapeutic just in terms of the process, but also being able to tell your story through the artwork. And the very first artwork that we did was called A Body of Works, which the women crocheted their stories into baskets that were the size of their bodies, and we had recordings in them which told the collective story of the woman. This was at the Feldman Gallery in New York as part of the Women in Genocide exhibition, at the Haifa Museum of Art, at the African Studies Gallery, and now at the Design Museum in Holon as part of their 10th anniversary. In addition, we've been at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. We do street art. We've got a big mosaic in Rothschild saying we were all once refugees. And we take part in many sort of festivals, art festivals, etc. I know that I don't have a lot of time, so I just want to, I don't know if anyone's told me I've got time. No.
You've got 1 minute.
Okay, so I will end off. Yes, sorry, I couldn't see around my glasses. So I will just end off with sort of like a little description of an artwork which was at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, which was on there for 7 months with Gil Yefman, who had a solo exhibition and chose to share it with a 92-year-old Holocaust survivor and with Kuchinate. And I think that I want to tell you the story because I think it really underlines what we're about. Our motto being we were all once refugees is what you will see in Rothschild Street, and which really weaves its way through everything that we do. And in this exhibition, which was an exhibition about the Holocaust, but with a bit of a different take on it, our woman crocheted a huge fence called the Living Fence with 200 Israeli women who were invited to come to the Israel Museum for 2 weeks before the exhibition started. And our Kuchinate women, refugees, taught Israeli women to crochet this piece of work, and they all made leaves that made this beautiful fence. And I invite you to go into our website. I will put the link on over here and look into our art collaborations, because it really is very, very impressive. And there was a meeting of minds, and there was a sharing of thoughts, and the woman made friends with many, many people in this way. We're extremely proud that the Tel Aviv Museum of Art acquired this piece of work to their permanent collection. And then we were asked to do another piece of work for an exhibition in Austria. And at this time, we chose to partner together with Amcha, which is a another amazing organization which helps Holocaust survivors. And our woman for 2 weeks taught 80 and 90-year-old women to crochet these leaves and make another work. And really it was, I don't think anyone wasn't moved by seeing them or seeing the work that they did, the laughing, the crying. Some of the women at the end, dedicated their works to people who had died in the Holocaust. And our women again made friends. I've got some beautiful pictures of them working together. And so our whole aim is to help with the emotional and mental health well-being of our women, and at the same time to invite the Israeli society and the global community in general to show compassion and empathy towards people, and to remember that we really all were once refugees. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Didi. It's amazing. It really is. So if we could now move on to Ricky, please, at Elif to talk a little bit more about the situation with children and childcare and the work that you're doing. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, we can't hear you, Ricky.
I think we've got a... No.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, hi. So, I'm Ricky. I work at Elif Felet, which is an organization that was founded by citizens for refugee children. Our organization was founded in 2013 by our former director. Her name was Yael Gvirtz, and she basically founded this organization after a Molotov cocktail was actually thrown into a babysitter. So babysitter is referring to what Miri was talking about before. They're pirate daycare centers, usually in very bad condition, where the children spend about 12 to 14 hours a day. And a Molotov cocktail was thrown in. This was in 2013. There was a lot of tension. Political tension, in Israel, as everywhere in the world, the situation of refugees is very divisive politically. There was a lot of tension and a lot of protests around that time, which is what incited violence against the community. And when she got there and we actually saw the conditions that the children spend all of their days in, she was really shocked, and she was like she had to go and do something about it. So she started the organization with a group of friends, and that's how we got started. So one of our main projects, our first project, is our babysitter project, where we extend support to 10 of these babysitters. So we place about 50 volunteers each year to work in the babysitters and give the children attention that they sorely need, because usually the amount of caretakers versus the amount of children is a very bad ratio. There aren't enough caretakers for the children, and the children don't receive enough education. They don't receive enough care, even in their basic needs. And we actually see it really causes a lot of developmental delays in the children. So we place volunteers in the babysitters in order to help the children develop properly and keep them safe. As Miri said, there were a lot of deaths actually in the babysitters, and we feel that the presence of more additional care and additional help is very helpful in keeping the children safe. So that's one of our main objectives. Our second program is our after-school activity center. So as Miri said, there are a lot of children who after school, after 1:30, they don't have anywhere to go. And because their children work very long hours, they're just spent by themselves in the streets. The streets are not safe in the areas where they live. So we started an after-school program for children. This year, we had about 70 children in the program, and next year we're extending it. And we'll have even more children in our after-school programs. Our third program is our new therapeutic services program. We really see in the babysitters and then also later in school. As I said, the children suffer from a lot of developmental delays and also emotional problems because of the lack of care that they receive in their early life. We basically started this program to try and augment it, working within the schools with the guidance counselors to try to provide additional therapeutic support. So art therapy, which works very well as we see in Didi's situation. Speech therapists, because many of the children speak, they hear a lot of different languages, but they don't actually have one language that they're very, very firm in as their mother tongue. So we're going to have speech therapists, drama therapists, and so on. Lastly, one of our programs, which actually was a very small program but recently grew, is our food program. So we have an emergency aid program in food assistance, and before COVID, it was quite small. We were only giving food to about 40 families. And since middle of March, we actually extended our food program to 650 families that we were giving food to all through the pandemic. I have another minute, but I'll just say another word about food. And if there are any questions about that, maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. But yeah, a lot of people, because they're not entitled to the social protections that Israelis are, such as Social Security, they really found themselves without any means of providing for themselves, without even their basic needs being met regarding food and housing. And that's really one of the big issues that we were having during this pandemic. I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ricky. That's brilliant. We can now move on to Julie Fisher, please. Julie and I, as I say, we're both wives of ambassadors at the same time in Israel. It's fantastic to see that Julie's still in Israel and still incredibly involved in this work. So Julie, please do tell us what you want to tell us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with all of you tonight to discuss an issue very close to my heart. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for choosing to focus on this compelling topic. I had the privilege of meeting Rabbi Leah Molstein this past December at the Union of Reform Judaism, the biennial in December. My husband and I grew up in the Reform movement in the United States, so a sister movement to yours. And thank you to my dear friend Celia. When my husband and I arrived in Israel 9 years ago, new to diplomatic life, we discovered that most of the ambassadors and their spouses were a whole generation older than we were. And it was a huge relief and also a joy to meet Celia and Matthew and their adorable little girls. A young family within the ranks of the diplomatic community was hard to find. Celia taught me by impressive example that you could juggle young children, run a business, host high-level government officials, and do impactful volunteer work in the community. So thank you, Celia, for leading the way.
Thank you.
As a product of the Reform movement all my life, I remain full of gratitude for the gift that I was given to experience and see the full range of Jewish choices in modern life, and for imbuing in me a deep responsibility to do my part to repair the world and engage in social justice. In the Torah, we are commanded to take care of the stranger among us no fewer than 36 times. And in history, and for some of us in very recent history, we were refugees ourselves. So this work is deeply personal for me. My introduction to the world of refugees began long ago when I was a child in Minnesota, when our synagogue sponsored a family of Vietnamese boat refugees. And it demonstrated to me the role that community and religious organizations can take in helping with global challenges, even when they happen miles and miles away. So fast forward to my first year living in Israel, when I met another refugee, a young Eritrean woman who had just arrived in Tel Aviv after being kidnapped from a refugee camp in Africa, trafficked through the Sinai desert, where she was ransomed, tortured, and dumped at Israel's border. Do you remember this, Celia? We were together when we visited with her. Yeah. And we were shocked when the young woman rolled up the leg of her pants to show us the scars on her leg. This is seared in my mind. The needs of this vulnerable community was suddenly and painfully very evident to me. And soon after this visit, my daughter and I began volunteering in a dingy childcare center and inviting others from the expat and diplomatic community to join us in food deliveries and holding babies who would otherwise be stuck in cribs for hours and hours at a time with no human contact. Actually, I was with Ellie Fellet at that time. From there, we began getting to know all the different organizations that work with this vulnerable community. One large project we worked on, which happened just a year after the group of babies died, which has been referred to a couple times in this call, was making badly needed safety repairs to Ghanim child care centers, where we could see clearly that our work was making a difference in saving children's lives, replacing faulty wiring, broken windows, installing baby gates to keep toddlers from running out into the street, which happened several times, helping people find ways to volunteer and connect to groups doing the good work here in Israel became a full-time pursuit and passion for me. I began to receive an overwhelming amount of inquiries and interest, which led to the formation of the Consortium for Israel and the Asylum Seekers, which makes connections and builds bridges, connecting people around the world who want to contribute their time and resources and learn more about the African asylum-seeking community in Israel. During normal times, we speak to groups of visitors, introduce them in person to the asylum-seeking community here, and the organizations that support and advocate for them. We work on issues related to food security, safe housing, employment, medical care, mental health care, women's empowerment, education, and safe childcare. During the time of COVID-19, our focus has been on supporting the organizations that provide basic necessities, three of which you heard from tonight, Mesila, Kuchinate, and Ellie Fellet, three wonderful partners and leaders in the community. To get a taste of the type of projects we work on during regular time, I want to share a few examples. Running a backpack collection to be sure that children of asylum seekers going to school in the fall have new backpacks and school supplies like their peers. Helping an asylum seeker from Israel from South Sudan to find funding to attend university here. Supporting a local school setting up a therapy center for their students, many of whom are suffering from secondary trauma. Helping a local food distribution site find volunteers and increase funding due to the steep increase in demand for food. There's always a demand, and during COVID-19, we saw a huge increase in the demand. Assisting organizations outside of Tel Aviv who are helping smaller groups of asylum seekers spread around the country in places like Haifa, Beersheba, Rehovot, and Eilat, places that don't see as many visitors or outside support. We brief policymakers and law leaders around the world, including when they visit Israel, such as those in the US Congress and rabbis from the UK. We work with foundations and those in the philanthropic world who wish to learn more about the challenges and opportunities to make an impact with the community here. We support innovative solutions to problems, such as when community members in Bnei Brak worked with community activists and funders to erect tents to shield the asylum-seeking community from the harsh sun as they waited outside to extend their visas. I could go on, sharing examples and inspiring projects happening here. And I'm very happy to answer questions or be in touch directly with anyone who would like to learn more. In summary, around the world, there are over 70 million displaced people. I believe that the global refugee crisis demands action from all of us, from every individual and every community that's able to help. The challenges to the community here are serious, but the Israelis and partners around the world are dedicated to repairing the fabric of society and welcoming the stranger. And I find it inspiring every single day. And I relish the opportunity to highlight this impactful work. So thank you so much for your interest in learning about the asylum seekers in Israel and joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's brilliant. So let's move on now to Mutasim, please, who's actually from the community. Thank you for joining us, and I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you so much, Celia, for moderating this event and for the invitation. And thank you, Julie, also for extending this invitation yesterday. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be part of this panel and with all my friends here. So thank you for this opportunity and also for taking the time to feature this issue that is really close to our hearts. to start off with is that, highlighting this issue during this difficult time of pandemic, it is really important in that the pandemic has affected the refugees and asylum seekers, particularly in Israel, in a very, in a great way. And it is, and this is part of the reason why it is so important to highlight this issue during this time. I'd like to thank some of the organizations that did a lot of work to help the community, and without them it would have been worse. And among these organizations are the ones represented here, and I would like to to speak briefly on behalf of two of my baby organizations, the African Refugee Development Center and the African Students Organization. They're both in Israel, and the reason why these organizations are important because they're community-based organizations, and they embody the resilience of the community. And that, given despite the difficulties and how the government is responding to refugees and asylum seekers in Israel, the community is strong enough to advocate for its rights. And I understand that a lot of people or the audience do not understand, maybe do not have, the bigger picture, or, they may need to hear some, basic information about refugees and asylum seekers. I want to, just quickly speak about my personal journey. And I consider myself one of the, most, privileged refugees and asylum seekers, in that I'm right now, I'm in Washington, D.C., just finished my master's in law. And so, this is, just another reason to explain that how important it is to offer refugees an opportunity to realize their aspirations. And this journey, of making it to Washington, D.C. was not an easy journey. It started from Darfur. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story of Darfur, right? Though not all of the refugees in Israel, Darfur is as highlighted in the introductions of my friends. But Darfur is one of the regions in western part of Sudan that is going through genocide and systematic, persecution and marginalization by the Sudanese central government. And most of the people fleeing Darfur or Sudan and going to Israel, people who are fleeing from marginalized areas such as Darfur, they primarily belong to African ethnic groups. And if you ask why the government is targeting the people of Darfur, the main reason was to change the racial identity of the region Darfur from African majority to Arabs majority. I want to just be clear at this point that there is no tribal conflict between the Darfuris, the Arabs and non-Arabs, right? But the government used the Arab ethnic groups to promote its agenda, and that's part of the reason why myself and many others have separated from their families. When I separated from my family, I was 16. That was in 2003, and because our home was completely destroyed, and tens of people were murdered, and until this day, my family is living in a displaced persons camp in Darfur, and that's one of the reasons why I left the country. I could have, I was this close from being a child soldier, because losing your home and, having your family displaced, you didn't have much to lose, right? And a lot of people, and I can tell you, many of my friends chose to pick up machine guns to retaliate for their families. And that was the most ideal way to defend yourself and your family. But then, I'm not sure if that was a good decision for me to leave the country, but I had to leave the country. And by the way, I have to say that leaving the country was not a choice. And this applies to all the refugees and asylum seekers. When they leave their home countries, it's not that they decide to leave their countries and determine their destiny in advance. People flee to find safety and shelter, and that could be in the closest place possible. It could be internally shelter, internal shelter. It could be third or second or third or fourth country, as as in the case of Israel, because many of us had gone through many countries to arrive to Israel. There are some of us who've gone through 2 or 3 or even 4 countries to arrive to Israel. Not that we decided in advance to go to Israel, because many of us didn't have any idea about Israel, myself included. When I was in Egypt, I wasn't there for too long. And the reason why I had to leave to Israel, because I was under the fear of deportation or detention, even in Egypt, because of the diplomatic and political ties between the Sudanese and Egyptian governments, that people from Darfur are security threats to both Sudanese and Egyptian national security. And that's why I had to I had to leave for Israel. That wasn't an easy decision. I didn't have the chance to apply from Cairo to go to Israel to seek, to ask for a visa to get to Israel, because I would consider myself a privileged person to arrive, to go through that process, go into the Israeli embassy and ask for a visa to get to Israel. Not to mention the impossibility of getting a visa from Cairo to get to Israel. In the end, I want to just stop there because this is like a very long story and it's difficult to summarize this in 7 minutes. But the bottom line is, to make it to Israel was not a choice. That was the only option that available at that time. And unfortunately, the response of the Israeli government was not in line with the ideals that Julie was speaking about. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think it is important to provide these platforms to highlight these issues, and hoping that Israel will respond in a way that befits its values. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I mean, as you say, it's very, very difficult to summarize in 7 minutes, isn't it? But it's, it's amazing to hear your story, and it's amazing to see where you've ended up. Leah, what should we do now? Because we finished with our official line of speakers.
We have a few moments left. I think our audience has just been listening intently. So I don't know, Celia, whether you have another question for our speakers, or otherwise
I do.
I'm gonna. Yeah. I'll hand over to you for your question in that case.
Well, I'm interested to know yours as well, but I do have one very pressing question, which is about the pandemic, the COVID-19 situation. And I mean, obviously, the whole world is finding things difficult, but I can't imagine that a community like this isn't finding it even more so. And I mean, I'd just be interested to know, I don't know, maybe Miri, if you could just tell me a little bit, and then anybody who wants to contribute. But what are the main effects and challenges from COVID-19 that are facing the community? And I mean, what, if any, benefits and entitlements does the community have in the context of the pandemic? And if not Miri, then anybody else. Here we go.
You hear me? Because I hear.
Yes, I hear you.
A little bit broken, everybody. Okay. So I think the pandemic 4 months ago caught all the world in a big shock. And I think to begin with, a community that is in crisis or suffering from actually no status and no rights and not services in a routine and on a daily basis. So of course, a crisis like the corona, the impact was, I think, fatal. I do want to say one word about Mesila, because I feel I didn't say even one word. Mesila is, I think, the largest center in Tel Aviv that treats 10,000, approximately 10,000 men, women, and children every year directly, and thousands more indirectly by the Facebook and big events and everything. In a routine, we treat mainly children and families at risk, children with special needs, all to do with the babysitters. We have a care treating center for survivors of human traffic and slavery from Sinai. And we do a lot of community work as well. And I think 4 months ago, Mesila changed a little bit her work. First of all, the first 2 months, everything was closed. We have to remember that the community, the majority of the community work in the routine, in hotels, in coffee shops, in restaurants, in houses, in private houses. So from the mid-March, everything was closed. So around 75 to 80% of the community found themselves unemployed and not entitled of any kind of allowance or alimony. And we have to remember that it's the asylum seekers are not people that came with a large family or they have savings in the banks. So it means that very quickly by April, the families literally had nothing.
Oh, I think we've lost Mary.
It was dropped. Okay, Didi then. I mean, because you're working with the same community.
And I think Mutasim wanted to come in as well.
okay.
And then, so probably we'll take both of them, and then we might have to already wrap up, unfortunately.
Okay, Mutasim, do you want to go?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Oh, did you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, I'll just say a sentence. What I was just going to say is that many of the asylum seekers in Israel are victims of torture, and certainly a large percentage at Kuchinate. And so if you're a victim of torture, you're already carrying like 20 kilos on your back. And then comes this global pandemic and really just can be very, very overwhelming. And the job of the organizations, or of our organization, and I'm sure all of the others, is to really try and build resilience and help people to just cope through and ride the wave of this time and come through it, because it really is extremely difficult, particularly from a financial point of view. People are at the point of, serious sort of food poverty and homelessness. So I think all of the organizations together are really, really trying to help the community, and the community is trying to help each other to really try and prevent this disaster. And with Israel at a sort of peak of the second wave, we're all terrified of what's about to come and scared about the resources and whether things are going to get worse. So it's not an easy situation. Natasha.
No.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment about COVID-19 and its impacts on the community in a minute, or maybe less. As you know, most of the refugees and asylum seekers, did not have or do not have proper status, and most of them carry a conditional release visa that states that this does not constitute a work permit. And so as a result, a lot of people were not entitled, or still not entitled to, national insurance. And so, and on top of that, by the way, there was a law called deposit law that now is sort of declared void by the Israeli Supreme Court. That was a great thing, actually. The idea of the law was to deduct 20% of monthly income of refugees and asylum seekers. And so until the mid of the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs and didn't have enough savings to survive and live in a dignified way. And so that really posed a great risk until the law was declared void by the Supreme Court, and that's due to the litigation by some of the human rights organizations, including Kablo Vid. And so, communities still struggling with the pandemic, despite the the cancellation of law. But and the pandemic, by the way, these days are still spreading in the country, and that's part of the reason why it really requires a lot of support from organizations and people to help the community, especially the weakest links of the community, those who cannot work and support themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, an hour is really not long enough to do this topic justice. I think we've recognized that very, very clearly. I think what I want to encourage our listeners is to keep sending in questions. And if there is an interest in follow-up sessions where we could maybe zoom in on some of the topics, looking at a sort of a closer look at some of the work of the wonderful organizations that we've just heard about, we can definitely, that's the one positive side of the pandemic, is that we've all discovered that we can do these seminars without having to fly around the world. Although I know that many of you, when you can travel, are traveling around the world to raise awareness of the important work that you do. So I think for now, I want to say a really big thank you to Celia, first of all, for putting together this wonderful lineup, to all of our speakers, Mutazim, to Julie, to Miri, to Didi and Ricky, for joining us this evening. I think for many of our listeners, this has been a first introduction to this very, very important topic. Some of the things we've heard are not the nicest things to think about, to talk about, but there is also a lot of positive things that are achieved in this work. And the more that we raise awareness, the more we will be able to celebrate the small successes, and hopefully some big ones as well. So a big gratitude to all of you for joining us, to our speakers, to all of our listeners, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.